Good evening, everyone. Welcome. If I could please ask a quick turn off your cell phones. Let's not have any interruptions tonight. We are literally at the highest possible capacity, and I'm looking at a room of so many friends. For those new, my name is Laura Pelzer, and it is an absolute delight to hold the position of Executive Director for the Charleston Library Society in this moment, and welcome you to this rare and wonderful occasion. Tonight marks the second program in our ongoing series with Bond Street REIT, examining the vital connection between cultural institutions and democracy. It has been a personal pleasure to work closely with Michael Reynolds, founder of Bond Street REIT, and also a dynamic member of our Board of Trustees, whose vision and generosity make this series possible. We're honored to have his continued partnership and friendship in bringing these conversations to life. His deep belief in the role of culture to strengthen democracy is inspired by Alexis de Tocqueville, who toured America in 1831, specifically visiting Charleston in search of the special ingredient that made America's democracy so powerful. He discovered that the glue in community and civic discourse was its profoundly thriving cultural institutions. This series is meant to reinforce just that. And of course, the Library Society, an institution that has stood at the heart of this city's intellectual life since 1748, was here then and still is. For more than 2.5 centuries, this library has been a place where ideas are shared, challenged, and celebrated in democratic engagement, building community through the pursuit of knowledge and the exchange of thought. We hold the Bond Street series twice a year to emphasize how places like this, libraries, museums, archives, serve not just as guardians of history, but as active participants in civic life. While we could have been in a much larger venue, as you might imagine, or charged a higher ticket, the evening demonstrates purity of place and making great conversation available to all, a value that we deeply value. Michael Reynolds is a multidisciplinary focus and vast experience in entitlement, acquisition, development, and finance within the real estate sector. As the chairman of the board, founder, and CEO of Bond Street Investment Trust, a private REIT headquartered here in Charleston, he oversees the largest portfolio of convenience retail shopping centers across 9 states in the Southeast. And here tonight, through his friendship, we are privileged to welcome Jon Meacham, one of the most insightful voices in American public life. As a Pulitzer Prize-winning historian and biographer, he has gifted us powerful books, among those, many that have brought to life the stories of Jefferson, Jackson, George H.W. Bush, and Abraham Lincoln, exploration of the moral struggles and moments of grace that have defined our nation's leadership. Through his writing, teaching, and commentary, he reminds us that history is not something we leave behind, but something we carry forward. It's a living guide to who we are and who we still might become. Please join me in welcoming Michael Reynolds and Jon Meacham.
I have a few things to say. Most insightful voice in our public life, best restaurant in a hospital, right? You want to win, but it's not that hard. That's one. And you as multidisciplinary, I want to talk about. Because disciplinary, I see.
What you don't know is that he took the first chance he could to fly all the way from Nashville to haze me for an hour. So
And you all are here for this.
Yeah. Jon is a wonderful friend and the nation's foremost presidential historian. And it's
Best
a real
restaurant
honor.
in a hospital. See
Yes.
the point?
And it's a real honor to have you. Thank you. And he did this out of the kindness of his heart to help out this wonderful, wonderful institution. And very appreciative. Jon, you're known as an author, historian, presidential and otherwise, but you could also double as a ventriloquist.
Ventriloquist.
Yes. For maybe the Bush
For the young
family.
people, we'll explain what that is
Yes.
later. Yeah.
Yes. Tell us about George W. Bush.
I came all the way down here and talk about that asshole. So I often say that and this is a common point, our mutual
Friend Walter Isaacson says this as well, that the most important sentence ever originally rendered in English was written by Thomas Jefferson in the summer of 1776, that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. I know South Carolina's had some thoughts about that through the years. By the way, when Reynolds came, did y'all not know it was like Sherman? I mean, what? You did not really vet this at all. But it is the most important sentence. There have been sentences in Greek and in Hebrew and in Latin that have meant more. But I think in English, that is the one. And it's a little like the story about the Texas school board candidate who was against teaching Spanish in the public schools and said on the campaign trail, if English was good enough for our Lord Jesus Christ, it's good enough for Texas. So, when George W. was governor of Texas, I told him that story, to which he said, that's pretty funny, asshole. So we're very close. I love it. Ventriloquist is like, I teach at Vanderbilt, which we call the Sewanee of Davidson County in Tennessee. And this is one of the few rooms in America where you would get that joke. Thank you. And I had a student ask me not long ago how we used to do student newspapers. And I said, well, we would print out the columns and then we would put them on a page and you'd cut them and you'd paste them and print it. And she said, oh my God, that's where cut and paste came from. And I thought, oh Jesus, middle age. So I said, what do you think CC means? She said, I don't know. I said, carbon copy. She said, we're against carbon. I said, not that kind of carbon. Sorry. Was there a question?
Certainly, I've read all of your books. And one of the most moving moments for me, actually, related to you was when you gave the eulogy for George H.W. Bush at the National Cathedral in Washington. And I think it would be fascinating to hear how you became such good friends with George H.W. Bush and his family and became their biographer.
Sure. It was an unusual story because I was, our friend John Huey is here and he knows this history as well. I was the editor of Newsweek magazine. I'll explain that later, what that is. Newsweek in 1987, this is when the news magazine covers really mattered. On the week that Vice President Bush announced his candidacy to succeed President Reagan, the then editors put a picture of Vice President Bush on the cover with the line, "Fighting the Wimp Factor." Some of you may remember this. President Bush decided that Newsweek had called him a wimp. And I promise you, unto his last hour,
he could tell you everything about this story
and how outrageous it was. And so in 1998, and when that cover ran, I was in high school, actually, in Chattanooga. And in 1998, there was an occasion, President Bush had done a book with Brent Scowcroft, General Scowcroft, his national security advisor, and we were going up to do a little interview with President Bush and General Scowcroft to do a piece about the book. And I was sent up. And I thought this was a sign of my meteoric rise, my subtlety, my grasp of post-Cold War politics. I was sent so that I could say, Mr. President, I was in high school when they did that. So it was entirely a chronological assignment. My view of George H.W. Bush, walking into that room at Walker's Point in Maine, was basically formed by Dana Carvey. Right? I was an undergraduate through most of his presidency. As I said, I went to Sewanee. My roommate was a guy from Lynchburg named Jack Daniels. I was a little fuzzy on the whole Gulf War thing. I thought it had something to do with Destin. It was just very, so I didn't really appreciate him as I should. how many people here met George H.W. Bush at some point? See if you agree with me. Within 30 seconds, his quiet, persistent, enveloping charisma was elevating and warming. And if you had to give ultimate power in a nuclear age to one set of hands, those big hands were entirely plausible. And so one of the things I'd say is I didn't fall in love with George Bush, but I came to love him, which is different. We spent a couple of years, again, in that era, news magazines, that generation of politicians liked having somebody that if they wanted to send a message or something. At Time magazine, it was Hugh Sidey. And at Newsweek, I kind of became this for President Bush. And 3 or 4 years into it, he said, I kept a White House diary. Would you like to read it? I was like, well, I'm free. Yeah. My tea time with Reynolds isn't till 4, Yes, Mr. President, I think I'd like to read your White House diary. And it was a remarkable document. It's the last presidential diary. It was dictated. He talked into a tape recorder. This is a sign of how, this is like talking about the Peloponnesian War. He didn't want there to be any question about the public funds and his private interests. Sit there for a second. I didn't say anything. You connected the dots. He sent an aide out to the drugstore in Washington to buy microcassette tapes and batteries to go into his tape recorder because he didn't want it ever to be said that he had spent public money on this. So one of the things about that generation of WASPs was, they raised repression to an art form. And so he didn't believe that he should ever complain to anyone about the troubles of the presidency. As he put it, nobody wants to hear you if you've got the nuclear codes go, oh, woe is me. And he's right? Again. So it was as if he couldn't complain to anyone else, so he complained to himself. So this diary is him having a kind of autotherapy. And it's a riveting document. I drew on it heavily for the biography I did. I'm going to publish a standalone volume in a couple of years. And so that's the basic story.
But it was Barbara who insisted that you write his biography.
Well, sort of. Now, whatever Mrs. Bush said, one did. Post haste. As President Bush once said, Bar, how do you have so goddamn many opinions? We could have put her on cable access and just had her talk. But what they wanted to, so there was some talk about we were just going to publish the diaries. And it was Mrs. Bush who said, don't you think George is worth a book? And I was like, yes, ma'am. Type. And it was, what's so fascinating about his story, even though it was only 48 months as a presidency, is, as Henry Kissinger remarked, George Bush compressed 8 years into 4. The Berlin Wall falls. Rush Limbaugh goes national. One of the wings of a butterfly that has an impact we don't know, that you can't tell, was the failure of the nomination. This is as dorky as it gets. Remember when John Tower was nominated to be Secretary of Defense in 1989? First Republican senator from Texas since Reconstruction. One of the reasons John Kennedy was in Dallas on November 22nd, 1963, was because Lyndon Johnson could not stand the idea that there would be 2 Republican senators from Texas. And there was a young guy running in the 64 race who looked pretty promising. His name was George H.W. Bush. So Tower nomination falls apart because senators suddenly discovered, like gambling in the casino, that a lot of senators drank. Stunning. When that nomination collapsed, it was on a Friday, and President Bush wanted to get it taken care of before the Sunday shows. So he reached out to someone he knew could be confirmed quickly, who was in the House leadership ladder, named Dick Cheney. He plucks Cheney out, opening the whip position in the House that is filled by Newt Gingrich. Wing of a butterfly creates a hurricane, right? So that's why history's fun. And, you know, what I think we can learn from President Bush is, look, he would cut your throat for a vote. Right?
He was a ferociously ambitious man.
Ask Michael Dukakis about that. Right? But George Bush would cut your throat for a vote and then be the first person to call 911. Right? There was an ambition that was tempered by a devotion to the national interest. He would do almost anything to get power, but once he had power, he did things against his self-interest. 1964, he loses that Senate race, and in that Senate race, he opposed what is now one of the most popular pieces of legislation in American history, the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Barry Goldwater was against it. Your senators were against it. So Bush was against it. It's now very difficult to talk about opposing the 1964 Civil Rights Act. But in 1968, when he'd gone back to Texas, run for the House, won, was representing the 7th District of Houston, Texas in Houston, Dr. King is killed the first week of April 1968, and the 1968 Civil Rights Act, which was a fair housing law, had been held up in the Congress. They brought it forward. George Bush, conservative Republican, votes for the 1968 Civil Rights Act after opposing the 64 Act, knowing he might lose his seat. He has a ferocious public meeting in Houston at Memorial High School. People are screaming stuff at him, words you shouldn't have said then and you can't say now. And he quoted Edmund Burke. He said, sometimes your representative owes a reflection of your will, and sometimes he owes you his judgment. And my judgment is you cannot ask men to put on the uniform of the United States Army, fight our Cold War battles, and then say where they can buy a house or not, if they have the money to do it. And so repeatedly he did that. And I think is an example of an imperfect man who left us a more perfect union.
Well, I'd like to pivot off of that statement. This is a document that was written by you when
and I'm sure I agree.
Yes. When you were
well put.
When you were chairman of the Thomas Jefferson Foundation in Virginia. And this has been on the wall of my office for a number of years. And I think it's some of the most profound things that I've read from your desk. And I will read them right now. And this is about,
really throw yourself into it. I mean, make it.
And this is referencing Thomas Jefferson. Of course, your Jefferson book was the largest selling presidential biography of all of your works, and what a masterpiece. And so you wrote, despite all of his shortcomings and despite all of the inevitable disappointments, he left America and the world a better place than he found it. That he did not live a perfect life, that he failed to deliver on the promise of the Declaration of Independence, that he has been condemned as a hypocrite in the eyes of history, are, to my mind, reasons to engage with him, not to excoriate him. I believe that the moral utility of history lies in seeing that even the finest of past generations were capable of horrendous moral error. Arthur Schlesinger Jr. once observed, self-righteousness is in retrospect is easy, also cheap. I agree. Instead of feeling morally superior in retrospect, we should address the cares and concerns of our own time in real time. That's the real moral utility of history. And you wrote this in the summer of 2018 when America was in convulsions about our statues and you actually saved the Thomas Jefferson Foundation from collapse by these words because donors were fleeing. And I keep that on my wall because I so respect that opinion that history is not our future, it's a guide from the past. Prophetic words.
That's the only nice thing you've ever said to me. No, you're very generous, and I overstated its impact. But that is my. It's essentially that you focus in on it. That's my entire philosophy. If I have a philosophy, which is a grand word, that is it. It's that if you're looking for perfection in the past, you have as much chance of finding it as you do in the present. Now, y'all are better people than I am, which is not hard, so don't get cocky. But I know that if I do the right thing more than half the time, that's a hell of a good day. And I don't have that many of them. We have most of the diocese here. So I can say we could vote something in, right? Robert Louis Stevenson once said, the duty of the Christian is not to succeed, but to fail cheerfully. By that standard, I am a very successful Christian. But I believe
this
we
was
put
in the face.
Yeah, and I believe
all
we
the
put
protests.
people. I believe we put people on pedestals not to make them remote, but just to make them more visible. And my favorite example of this is actually not Jefferson, but Lincoln. The next time you're in Washington, go to the Lincoln Memorial and put this in the back of your mind. When you approach the Lincoln Memorial, it is a classic temple, right? It is the point of communication between the temporal and the eternal. It is a theocentric structure. But when you walk in, what do you see? You see a human face, war-weary, exhausted, grieving, uncertain. And the majesty of that monument is the contrast. Because even at it shows us that even at our pinnacle,
and Abraham Lincoln is the
pinnacle.
pinnacle. Until
1864, he was for colonization. Nobody likes to talk about that, but he did. He was. He didn't really, until the very, very end, envision a multiracial democracy. We've only had a multiracial democracy in this country since 1965. Right? We're not 250 years old. We're 60 years old. And so no wonder this is so goddamn hard. Sorry, kids. I know your dads never use that kind of language. But think about it. We're a developing democracy. And even Lincoln failed on that. So what are we supposed to do? Not talk about it? Not look to them? No, you look to them not because they got everything right, but because they managed to get one thing right.
It was your guidance during that period that saved that wonderful institution that we're both part of. And another event at Monticello that really rang true to me was you were on the dais with Morning Joe, shall we say? And Evening Joe. And the statement that he made resonates with me, and that was, listen, I get paid to talk on TV, but let me just tell you folks here, turn off the TV and go talk to your neighbor. That's all I'm going to tell you. And that type of interaction is the very type of interaction that this Library Society promotes every week. And these institutions, and I know that when I quoted de Tocqueville earlier this week, you fell out of your chair.
All right, let's be clear. Mike Reynolds thinks Tocqueville is a linebacker for LSU, right?
But I did do my, chatbot research on him. And he did come, he toured America in 1838, and I thought that he may have come to the Charleston Library Society, and Lisa confirmed that, in fact, he did not. He met Charles Pinckney on a carriage, and he told him about the Charleston Library Society. And his conclusion on visiting America was, and I'd like you to think about these things, is that America is a collection of these organizations, church groups, Kiwanis, Lions, library societies, all over America. Every community has them, and that's where the community is formed.
Yeah, Edmund Burke called it little platoons, right? Civil society is atomized, but what do atoms do? Atoms make compounds. And that was Tocqueville, one of Tocqueville's central insights. It was both community association, and I salute my friend and all of you all for doing this, for practicing this, because Lord knows you don't need to be watching any more cable news. And let's be honest, if you're here, you watch too much cable news, right? Right. This is actually an intervention. And by the way, John Huey thought he saw Tocqueville here in 1838. But the other insight from Democracy in America was the reality of equality, of the idea of equality. Not equality of outcome. This is not a socialistic point. But equality in the French of the time was roughly synonymous with dignity. That people actually mixed. There would be different kinds of folks in the taverns, different kinds of people from different strata of society in the Masons or whatever it might be. And that is the oxygen of democracy. Because if we don't recognize, let's make this very personal. If I don't recognize that your vote counts as much as mine, if I don't recognize that your rights are as essential as mine, then I could do something extreme to either try to take away your vote or abridge your rights. If I don't see you, that you and I are on the same plane. And there's a reason democracy is so hard. It's because it does require give and take. And since the third chapter of Genesis, we've been taking. Right? There was a piece of fruit. We were told not to take it. We wanted it. We took it. And we're living in the long shadow of that. I firmly believe that what we're experiencing now in the country is not so much an economic or political crisis, but a moral one. Because we don't really see each other as of equal dignity. We see each other reflexively. Too many people see someone with whom they disagree or with whom they think they might disagree as a reflexive, implacable adversary, not as someone to be convinced or someone to learn from. And that is a moral decision. And 9 times out of 10, 99 times out of 10, out of 100, you could have that conversation here or Kiwanis or wherever and not come away changing your mind at all. But as Howard Baker, a great Tennessean, once said, every once in a while the other fellow may just be right. And it's not impossible, right? The breakdown of that unfolding conversation is, I think, at the root of what we're dealing with. And I don't want to pretend, I want to be very clear, I don't think there's some magical moment we should go back to. People talk about, I used to get into fights with President Biden about this. He used to talk about restoring the soul of America. What was that moment, right? I mean, if you're a boringly heterosexual white Southern male Episcopalian, which most of you are, we're okay, right? Things have worked out for us. The point is it's supposed to work out for everybody. And so this is not about getting back to, oh, if the world could only be like it was in 1955. Not so great if you didn't look like me. The women in the room, about half of you, you've only had the vote for 100 years. Less than half of the full span of the republic. Black folks couldn't do it with ease until 1968. So what is that wonderful Brigadoon-like moment? There isn't one. We have done immensely great things. I love this country, but you can't love the country only when you win. And even our greatest achievement, I think if I ask you all, what's the greatest thing the United States of America ever did? Just think for a second. I think most of us would end up with or come to mind the Second World War, right? The defeat of fascism in the Pacific and in the Atlantic world. Here's a trivia question. When did we declare war on Nazi Germany? 5 days after Pearl Harbor, after Germany declared war on us. We did not unilaterally declare war against the Third Reich until they declared war on us, in one of the many mistakes from which Hitler would never recover. So even the most important, greatest thing we've ever done, we were dragged into, right? And as Churchill once said, you can always count on the Americans to do the right thing once we've exhausted every other possibility.
So you mentioned 1955, and your current work, you're only 1,000 pages into it, I understand.
Oh, God.
Is on...
My children think it's just outrageous.
On general...
They call it literary kudzu, which is really funny, and so I'm sort of proud of them, but I'm also kind of pissed off that they said it. So it's both.
On General Eisenhower.
Yeah.
And 1,000 pages. Tell us...
You don't need to keep going back to that.
Tell us about that work.
Well, Eisenhower...
And how you chose Eisenhower.
Okay. I've realized often in retrospect, not in real time, that I'm always kind of writing about what's happening at the moment. Freud said all biographers are really writing about themselves or their fathers. I wrote Franklin and Winston, a book about Roosevelt and Churchill, at the period when the second President Bush and Tony Blair were building an alliance in the war on terror. I wrote Jefferson when we had a tall, philosophically inclined, really good politician, but who pretended he didn't like politics, which sounds a lot like President Obama to me. I wrote Jackson when George W. Bush was expanding the powers of the office, back when we thought he was expanding the powers of the office. Sweet, isn't it? It's kind of touching. And I believe that one way to think about, so this is why Eisenhower now, one way to think about where we are today is that from 1933 until 2017, we lived in a country that was not wholly liberal nor wholly conservative, neither wholly left nor wholly right, but was a kind of figurative debate, a figurative conversation between Franklin Roosevelt and Ronald Reagan. Right? That was the spectrum. You decided the relative role of the state in the marketplace. You decided the relative projection of force against commonly agreed upon foes and rivals. Right? Even the most dovish of Cold Warriors didn't want the Soviets to win. It was just, how do you do it? Our politics from 1933 until 2017 was about means more than ends. Today, it's about ends. That conversation, however, would not have been able to have unfolded if Eisenhower in 1952, having defeated Robert Taft, had not decided that he was going to essentially ratify the New Deal, because that's what genuine conservatives do. President Reagan, George W. Bush were not really conservative. The incumbent administration is in no way conservative in the way we would classically would have thought of it. What conservatives do is they confront reality as they find it, and they try to make it a little less terrible. Right? That's basically it. President Reagan, President Bush, they were reformers, whereas President Eisenhower, I would argue, President Ford, President Bush Sr. were in fact more classically conservative, which is ironic given that those three would be seen as moderates. In any event, Eisenhower's decision not to try to repeal Social Security and to invest in what was then called the Mutual Security Program. Some of you may remember that. The Mutual Security Program was the successor to the Marshall Plan. The Mutual Security Administration, which was about investing in the fight against totalitarianism, mostly through loans, was then replaced, or renamed rather, the USAID by President Kennedy. Dwight Eisenhower, who always remembered, in a way that I find immensely admirable, always remembered that his fame was purchased by the blood of others. He knew that more than 100,000 Americans had died in Europe so that he could become president. So he was always, one of the reasons he didn't want to get into politics for a long time was that he thought, if I announce that I'm a Republican or a Democrat, half the men I commanded will think I was on the other side. Right? It's almost unimaginable to think about character at that level. But he believed that except for extreme moral crisis, and there are those things, but by and large, the middle way between the extremes of left and right has much to recommend it. And I believe that that became the consensus in the country until this populist revolt of 17 and again in 24.
So might I reveal one of your findings about his driver, and you have your own little theory of...
Oh, yeah, thanks, yeah. So you all may remember, he rumored at the time that in the maelstrom of war, he had a bit more of a relationship with his British female driver than, say, you should have with your Uber guy, right? And unless they're cute, and that's fine. We take the Bush. So before I get to that, do you all remember when David Petraeus, General Petraeus,
had a female biographer, right? And he had an affair with her.
So when that story broke, my phone rang one day. This is a true story. And it was George H.W. Bush. And he said, "How you doing?" I said, "I'm fine, Mr. President." He said, "I think you're cute, but not going to happen." That was too bad. That's a true story. He was very funny. And then he hung up. He thought of the line. He wanted to deliver it. He had a martini to drink. He's like, "Say it like a..." But I have a sense, Eisenhower was beseeched really from, at Potsdam, Harry Truman said to him, "If you want to run for president," this is 1945, July 45. If you want to come back and run for president, I'll step down and be vice president. Right? So that's where this starts, early. They ended up hating each other, but that's the way these things sometimes happen. But in 1948, both parties came after him. And as you all know, it's really hard if someone is saying, here is a presidential nomination, there's not a huge category of people who go, I'm good, right? Not a lot of people do that. Eisenhower did it. He did it with the Republicans, and then the Democrats, because they were the incumbent party, their convention was second. And Harry Truman was deeply unpopular. This was the Dewey defeats Truman year. And the Democrats come after him again, including Olin Johnston and Strom Thurmond. It was this weird coalition of people. There was some liberals who didn't like Truman and conservative Democrats, particularly in the South, who wanted someone, they didn't like Truman's civil rights platform, which of course led to the Dixiecrat revolt. This is a couple of weeks before that. And up until the Saturday before the convention begins on Monday, people are saying, James Roosevelt, others, are saying, the nomination is yours. And Eisenhower keeps saying no. And he later told a reporter, in an off-the-record conversation, which thank God has now come to us through history, that he was worried about threats, about rumors and stories and gossip that would, quote, destroy his family. So I have a slight twitch that the rumors about the driver would have been deployed against him, and he just didn't want to put Mrs. Eisenhower at risk, didn't want to put that reputation at risk. She was writing a book at the time that was due to be published in October of 1948, and he didn't know what she was going to say. Eventually the book comes out, it's fine, and that sort of opens the way for 1952.
So for all the children in the room, I think you would say read, 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 and study history and read books.
Yeah, it's what I do.
And yet, we're in a world where, thank God, Buxton Books is still here, and nice to have you here.
What I find...
And I'll have you know that John, prior to coming, went down to Buxton Books and signed 50 or so books, which was very gracious for them.
It was they're very kind to ask. There are two editions, one of the Federalist Papers and one of the Declaration and the Constitution that I did a little introduction for. Again, my children find this to be a little outrageous, that my name is slightly larger than Alexander Hamilton's. And so this summer, my very smart alecky son, and I will say to you in private here, my Harvard-educated son, which is very hard for a Sewanee person to get out of my mouth, I tell him I'm doing this. I'm doing the Federalist Papers and the Declaration. And he said, oh my God, what's next, the Gospels? And then he went on ChatGPT and said, write an introduction to the Gospels in the voice of Jon Meacham. And I got to tell you, it was pretty good. I'm saving it.
So as an author, a brilliant one, presidential historian, the value of this written word, look at this library. Hundreds of years of books. What will happen to your trade in the next 20 years with?
Oh, I'll be dead. But in the long, as John Maynard Keynes said, in the long run, we're all dead. I'm not worried about the enduring relevance and power of storytelling. Right? We've been doing this since the fires on the savannah. How you consume it how we consume it is going to be what continues to change. I continue to read everything in physical form. My wife reads on Kindle constantly. Whatever works, right? I just want you to read. It's interesting, this might interest you all. I have novelist friends who now 90% of the people who read their books read them on electronically. I'm still at about 80-20, physical. If you want to read something I do, you are more likely, far more likely, to read it physically, which I'm delighted about. And I have not had yet the experience that my friend Doris Kearns Goodwin had, which was when she wrote the book about Taft and TR called The Bully Pulpit. It was so heavy that she got an email from someone saying, I fell asleep and it broke my nose. So I have not done that. I've only killed one person, and that was in a speech at Washington University in St. Louis. And given my demo, it's pretty amazing. It's only one. I'm very big in assisted living facilities. They slot me in between Murder, She Wrote and Jeopardy. But the other thing, a very small category called great tweets. It's like French military victories in the 20th century. About a year ago, someone tweeted out that if Mr. Rogers and Doris Kearns Goodwin had had a one-night stand, I would have resulted.
The truth.
I thought it was great. Doris was upset. So she learned how to use her cell phone, and she called me. And so I picked it up and said, Mom! She said, that's not funny. She said, this is all true. She said, I don't mind being your mother, but I don't want to be a floozy. What do you mean he picked me up? I said, it's okay, sweetheart. He picked you up in the C-SPAN bar. It's okay. It's all right. But reading, look, I find, confession time, I'm not a Republican, I'm not a Democrat. I voted for presidents of both parties, you know. I live in Nashville, so when I say I have conservative friends, that's redundant. But I do find the pace of the current news to be so overwhelming and part of that's strategic, right? There's a reason for that. That's sort of the idea. I feel very guilty to tell you it's worked with me. I'm exhausted. I'm not sure do I start with the East Wing, which apparently is all being taken down now? Do you start with the incumbent president saying he wants $230 million from the Justice Department? Do you go, where do you begin? So one thing to do is not to find refuge in the sense of escape, but refuge in the sense of renewal in the stories of the past.
Which brings me to an interesting remark that you made. I don't know when you did
There's
it.
one. I made
yes,
one.
Your beautiful book on Jefferson. You said that you actually slept in his bed one night. Did you have this?
Elizabeth Chu made that possible. Elizabeth Chu and I, that could really go the wrong way, couldn't it? That could really, really.
Did you feel the man? I mean, was this while you were writing the book? You're cute, but not yet.
You know, he's from San Francisco.
You got me.
That's illegal here.
You got me.
Feeling the man.
Yes.
Sorry. Yes, I did. Elizabeth Chu kindly set that up. Now the head of the South Carolina Historical Society. South Carolinians, y'all have so little interest in yourselves. I don't know what she could possibly do. I think that, yes, what I learned in doing that was that, and Jefferson left very little of this sort of thing to chance. He cared a great deal about architecture and design. And the first place the sun hits on that mountain is his bedroom. And the room fills with light almost instantly when it comes up over the Southwest Mountains, I think. And so the day I was there, I woke up and, biographer, right. And then I spent the day at Monticello, and then I'd love to say I did this on purpose, but it was a total mistake or coincidence. I happened to be down at the cemetery as the sun was setting. And the last place the sun shines on Monticello is the cemetery. And so Jefferson, who had no problems with self-regard, had a kind of heliocentric sense of himself.
So we have just a few minutes left, and I want to leave it to you to speak about whatever you'd like to talk to these wonderful people and the institution of community and the library society and the power of community and just gathering and turning off your television and go talking to your neighbor.
Yeah, read a book, talk to your neighbor. But again, it's not a refuge, and I don't know where y'all are politically. I can guess. Someone asked me an hour or two ago, I'm so worried, are we going to make it? And I don't know. And I'm not sure I would have said that. I'm sure I wouldn't have said that 10 years ago. But it has been now a very difficult decade since 2015. And whether you approve, disapprove, embrace, reject, are thrilled by, or are horrified by what the incumbent administration is doing, 49.9% of the country decided that they wanted to try this again. And that's the way this works. And a friend asked me earlier today, what are our better angels up to? Right now, they're in the men's grill, hopefully trying to decide what to do. But I'm a big believer in not setting the bar too awfully high. We don't have to get everything right, but we have to get the big things right. And the big thing to get right is the rule of law, the separation of powers, and the capacity of those who have taken an oath before God and all of us to fulfill their particular duty under that Constitution. And the fact that you applaud is a sign of how troubling this is, right? Because you know exactly what I'm talking about. So I have a couple of things and we're part of that, right? We, the people, are also responsible. We have to incentivize what we want. Because let me tell you, the incentives, politicians are like all of us, only more so. As Lincoln said, all men act on incentive. It's one of the things that worries me most about this districting, which seems very dorky, but we're down to even before they started redrawing these maps in midstream, we had 40 swing seats in the country. So less than 10% of the House is actually competitive every year. So there's no incentive beyond your primary. And God bless the people in Indiana for just saying no. By the way, what are they doing? They're exercising divided sovereignty. They are acting within the federalist system, and they are resisting pressure from those who are powerful. And history tells us the following, and this is not a partisan point. It may have partisan expression at the moment, but this is a millennia upon millennia point. If you govern by brute strength, if you govern by bullying, I promise you this: the history of the world is the story of how the strong become the weak and the weak become the strong. That's why you have the rule of law, is that it takes the chaos out of civil society. What you all are doing by being here, what Mike has done with his generosity, what the library does by having these books available, is fulfill a role that is about shedding light as opposed to reflexively generating heat. And the incentive structure at this hour prizes heat. So if you are in this room right now, I suspect that you have access at some level and to some degree to people who hold elective power. If you see someone doing something of which you approve, tell them. Because I promise you, they're hearing about it from the other guys. They're human beings. Don't just think, oh, my wife and I get this all the time. She thinks that, Rachel Maddow is a little squishy. But you can't just bang on your high chair. Right? Oh, why can't everybody be not? That's not it. Right? This is what you all are doing with civil society, is you are having a conversation that at least has the capacity to remind people of why the rule of law matters, why the Constitution matters, why these norms matter. Because you can't write any law that covers every situation. Right? Montesquieu taught us that. It's the spirit of the law. Somebody asked me the other day about the East Wing thing and taking it down and said, is there any rule? And actually, there's not particularly. It just never occurred to anyone that it would happen. The story of our country, at its best, is when we remember that the more we live into that most important sentence ever originally rendered in English, is an era that we are proud to be living in. And when we fall away from it, those are the eras that we have to hang our head. I don't need to tell anyone in the American South, my native region, about that. Is there anyone here who would not want to be at the top of the Pettus Bridge on the 7th of March, 1965, instead of at the foot of the bridge with the troopers? But you know what? There were a lot of people with the troopers. And so let's not, I'm not condemning them. I'm not being self-righteous in retrospect. Let's not look up at the past adoringly or down on it condescendingly. Let's look it in the eye so that when we look ourselves in the eye, we have a better idea of what we want to see.
John, that's beautiful. I want to thank John. He came down from Nashville today as a gift to the Library Society. And so, John, thank you.
Thank you.